Okay, there's going to be 3 different types of sutures that I want to show you today that's been made at the request of some students. The first that I want to show you is how to do a subcuticular closure of an incision. And you already know from watching my other videos how to do a subcuticular closure. But I want to show you how to start it and end it. And then the other type of stitch I'll show you today is what's called an inverted interrupted suture. And it can be either interrupted or it can be running continuous. It doesn't matter. So what I want to show you is, if this is an open incision that I've drawn here, what we like to do when we're doing a subcuticular closure is, and I've learned this after years of operating on people, the best way to do a subcuticular closure is to do it and not have a knot tied here or at the end. The best way to do it, and I've shown this to you before in one of my other videos, is to start about a 1/2 inch outside the incision, bring the needle right up through the very crotch of the laceration that you're sewing up, or the incision that you're sewing up. And all we're going to do is we're going to put a piece of tape over this end here. We're not going to tie this in. One of the problems that students have is, where does the first stitch go? Let me tell you the problem. You've been taught, and I taught you, when you're putting in your stitch, the stitch comes in, we go across, make another stitch, go across, sort of have this stepladder appearance. This works fine, but not when you're starting to do the stitch. When you're starting to do the stitch, instead of taking these wide bites, a bite here, the wide bites, you want to start with very small bites at the beginning. Let me show you. So I'm going to take just a tiny little bite here at the beginning, and normally my next bite will go across and it will go in there. But when we start this, I want to go back a little bit. I'm actually starting a little bit backwards when I put the stitch in. And then the same thing here. Normally, I'd tell you to pull the stitch across and you would start right there. But I'm not. At the very beginning, I'm going to start right where my other suture came out. Okay. Now I can start to make the regular size bites. And I'm doing this without a cut in the silicone, so you can actually see what this is going to look like. So this is the way to start a subcuticular suture. And when we pull this tight, when we pull our incision tight, it will all come together. Notice how that is pulled together here. So now let's go back and do this. Pull it out with a cut that I've made here. So here's a cut. Right here is a cut. Now I'm going to close the entire incision. My first stitch starts about a 1/2 inch out, comes right into the crotch of the laceration. And then my first stitch is a very tiny, small bite. Same thing here, very tiny bite starting back at the crotch of the incision. So I'm actually sort of overlapping my own suture. So I'm starting with very tiny bites at the very beginning. Now that I've started and I'm about a centimeter into this, a half-inch into this, now I can start to take my usual size bites. And I'm just barely under the surface of the skin. I'm truly in what's called the epidermis. Not the dermis, but the epidermis. So as I close this, now I'm doing the stair step, which is what we sort of showed here, where we go across, take a bite, across, take a bite, across. So that's all I'm doing now. And when we get to the end of this subcuticular, the students have asked me to show you what's called an Aberdeen knot. I don't know why they call it Aberdeen knot. Maybe it was invented in Aberdeen. Don't know. But it's not a knot that I like to use, and it's a knot that I don't like to teach because, frankly, it's a little bit advanced, and most of you guys are not good enough yet to be able to try this. But I'll show you how it's done. And if you feel good, you can try it in the operating room and try to impress your attending. But just like I was saying, it is a knot. And when you leave a knot, when you close somebody's incision and you leave a knot, they can feel that knot, and sometimes the skin does not heal very well around the knot. We're almost there. We're almost at the closure, and I'll show you what that means. So again, I'm getting right near the very edge. And normally what I would do if this was a live patient, as I get near the end of the closure, all I would normally do is pull the stitch out here, cut it, tape it down. And then when they come to the office, all I have to do is after the incision's healed, then I can grab the suture and literally just pull it all the way through. But that's not what you guys want me to show you. And if you tie an Aberdeen knot, remember, you're still leaving a knot at the end. So let me show you how the Aberdeen knot is done. So I'm going to tie a knot to close the incision here at the very, very last crotch opening of the incision. So what we do is we make a small bite. We come out right at the very crotch of the incision. And you hold your stitch like so. Pull it down. And we're going to do this 8 times. All I'm doing is leaving a large loop here at the end, pulling it through about 8 times. You can see it's pretty easy to do. Now the danger with this is that you can just pull these right out. So I've got about 8 ties in there. So my last tie, I pull it and I pull it all the way through, pulling the needle through. Now it's tight at the end, so there's an Aberdeen knot. And then we have to hide all of those sutures. So what we do is we go deep into the incision, down deep, and pull the knot under the skin, like so. So now it's tied. The knot is hidden, and we can cut it off right at the skin. If you do it right, you won't be able to feel the edge of the knot. But like I said, I prefer not to tie any knots because I think it's more cosmetic and it pulls the skin together very well. And I don't think I can pull this out. I doubt it. Maybe. Nope, doesn't look like it's going to let me. All right, now let me show you one other stitch that is pretty easy to do, but I was asked to demonstrate it to you. So we're going to make a new incision, make a new cut here. And because it's difficult to see the cut on this silastic, I'm going to mark it here. So the cut is right there. It was asked that I show you how to do an inverted stitch. All you do is, when you're closing the incision, if it's a deep laceration, and when you pull the skin apart, you should be able to see the white fascia down deep. To do an inverted knot, instead of doing the interrupted like I taught you, where you start on one side, go across, and then tie the knot over the incision, this is just a simple interrupted suture that I showed you here. So simple interrupted. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to show you is how to invert it. And you would do this where you have a laceration that needs to be closed in more than one layer. So open the incision. The first stitch goes deep in the fascia on the side of the incision towards me. And then I load up my needle, pull it back, and my second half goes deep, grabs the fascia, and pull it out here on the other side. Now before we tie this, I want to make sure that the suture is on the same side of the knot. So let me show you what that is. So I pull this down. There we go. And you can see if I tie this knot, the knot is tied deep where the fascial layer is at, and you can't see the knot. It's hidden below the skin. Again, you would do this type of closure when you need a multi-layered closure. So once I have the subcutaneous fascia closed as its own layer, I'll go back and put any type of stitch that I want to close the top with. I can use simple interrupteds. I could use a subcuticular. It doesn't matter. An inverted suture, all we're doing is closing it in layers and doing it deep in the lower fascia so that we can hide the stitch. So here you can see that the knot it doesn't cross over the stitch. The knot is going to be under the skin at the layer of the fascia. So here's our knot. Cut it. And you can't see the knot because they're down on the fascial layer, down deep. Now I can close the surface of this any way that I want to. I can close it with a subcuticular stitch, like I showed you, or I can close it with a simple interrupted on top. It doesn't matter. Or if it's a large incision, you can even close the skin with skin staples. So that's it. So the last thing I'm going to show you is, here's another incision. Let me paint it black for you. Is I'm going to show you how to end the subcuticular stitch if you want to tie a knot there. So let's assume that I have closed my incision using a subcuticular like you've been taught, running subcuticular. Now if you want to do a running hidden knot like what I just showed you, you can. All right. So we want to make sure and tie So I'm using silk on this, so I only need 3 knots. Now let's get down to the very end. So I'm going to close this subcuticular like you've been trained and you know how to do this before. And once we get to the end, we can tie an Aberdeen knot if you want to, or I'll show you how normally you end a subcuticular stitch. The problem is it's going to leave a knot. And again, the patient can feel that, and sometimes where the knot is hidden, the skin will separate and it won't heal well at that spot. So let's just for time's sake. So now let's just pretend that this is the end of my incision, okay? So to make a knot, all you do, instead of pulling the stitch all the way through, just leave a little tail and then tie to yourself on that little tail. And then we have to hide the knot. We don't want to leave it like that. So we take this, run it down deep, and take it out. And I'm actually glad that you can still see a little bit of the stitch there, because it just reinforces what I said. Leaving a knot is not a very cosmetic way of doing a sub-Q closure on skin. Okay, so Aberdeen hitch to close, or we can bury the knot, or we can use an inverted, interrupted suture, or you can do inverted, running, continuous. The same thing. That's it.